On May 26, 2026, the governor of Maryland signed a law that will make it illegal to buy, sell, manufacture, or transfer the most popular handgun in the United States. Not a machine gun, not an exotic military weapon, a Glock, the same pistol carried by over 65% of American law enforcement. The same gun that sits in more American holsters, nightstands, and gun safes than any other handgun on the market. Gone, banned. In one state, with more states already moving to follow. And here's what should make every gun owner in America pay close attention. The law doesn't ban the Glock because of what it is. It bans it because of what someone else might do to it. An illegal aftermarket device, already banned under federal law, can be attached to certain Glocks to convert them to fully automatic fire. Maryland's response wasn't to crack down harder on the illegal device. It was to ban the gun itself. That decision has triggered one of the most significant Second Amendment legal battles in years, and the outcome won't just affect Maryland. It could reshape gun law across the entire country. What the law actually says. Senate Bill 334 was signed into law by Governor Wes Moore on May 26, 2026. The law takes effect January 1, 2027. From that date forward, it will be illegal in Maryland to manufacture, sell, purchase, receive, or transfer what the state defines as a machine gun convertible pistol. The definition is the critical part. A machine gun convertible pistol, under Maryland's law, is any semi-automatic handgun that can be converted into a fully automatic weapon using an attachment that can be installed by hand or with common household tools. That definition, written broadly enough to capture the vast majority of Glock models currently on the market, effectively bans one of the most widely owned handgun platforms in the country. Americans own an estimated 10 million Glocks. Some industry analysts put the figure considerably higher. Glocks account for roughly 65% of handguns carried by American law enforcement. They are, by any reasonable measure, among the most commonly owned firearms in the United States. The device at the center of this controversy is commonly called a Glock switch, an illegal auto-sear that interferes with the trigger mechanism to allow fully automatic fire. Possessing one is already a federal felony under the National Firearms Act, punishable by up to 10 years in prison. The device is illegal, has been illegal for decades. Manufacturing one without proper federal authorization carries severe criminal penalties. Maryland's legislature looked at this situation, an existing federal felony already aggressively prosecuted, and decided the answer was to ban the firearm that the illegal device attaches to. That logic is what has gun rights organizations across the country mobilized, and it's what makes this case potentially significant far beyond Maryland's borders. The immediate legal challenge. The NRA, the Firearms Policy Coalition, and the Second Amendment Foundation filed their lawsuit in federal court on the same day Governor Moore signed the bill. That kind of immediate legal response signals that these organizations had been preparing their challenge well in advance. They knew what was coming and were ready. The legal argument centers on the landmark 2008 Supreme Court decision in District of Columbia v. Heller. In that ruling, the Supreme Court established that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess firearms for self-defense, and specifically held that handguns, as a class of weapons in common use for lawful purposes, cannot be subject to a blanket ban. The Glock is not a niche firearm. It is not an unusual weapon with limited civilian application. It is the most commonly sold handgun in the United States, carried by law enforcement across the country, and owned by millions of Americans for exactly the lawful self-defense purposes the Heller decision was designed to protect. The plaintiffs argue that Maryland's law is a direct violation of Heller. You cannot, under existing Supreme Court precedent, ban a firearm that is in common use for lawful purposes by claiming that an illegal modification device could theoretically be attached to it. By that logic, almost any firearm could be banned for what someone might do to it illegally. Maryland's legal team will argue the opposite, that the state has a legitimate interest in preventing the proliferation of weapons that can be easily converted to automatic fire, and that the law is a reasonable regulation rather than a blanket ban. Active and retired law enforcement are exempt from the law's restrictions, a carve-out that the plaintiffs argue actually undermines the state's position by acknowledging the gun's legitimate use. The case is heading to the U.S. District Court for the District of Maryland. From there, it will almost certainly be appealed regardless of the outcome, and depending on how the circuit courts rule, it could ultimately reach the Supreme Court. This is the question worth sitting with as this story develops. If the courts uphold Maryland's law, what stops other states from applying the same logic to other popular firearms? Maryland isn't alone. New York moved first. A Glock ban targeting the same category of machine gun convertible pistols was included in New York's 2026 to 2027 state budget and signed by Governor Kathy Hochul before Maryland acted. New York's law uses similar language and targets the same platform. Other states are watching. California, which has historically led the country in firearms restrictions, has been studying similar legislation. Several other states with Democratic legislative majorities have introduced comparable bills in their current sessions. The pattern is significant. This isn't one state acting in isolation based on a unique local problem. This is a coordinated legislative strategy, using the Glock switch as the justification for banning the most popular handgun platform in America in multiple states simultaneously. If the legal challenges fail and these laws survive constitutional scrutiny, that strategy will spread. For the firearms industry, the stakes are enormous. Glock's American operation is based in Smyrna, Georgia. The company employs thousands of Americans in manufacturing, distribution, and support roles. A patchwork of state bans targeting the same platform creates compliance and distribution complications that affect the entire supply chain, not just the states where the bans apply. For American gun owners, the stakes are more personal. The Glock isn't just a product. For millions of Americans, it's the gun they chose for home defense, the gun they trained on, the gun they trust, and now several states are in the process of making it illegal to buy a new one. To understand why this fight matters beyond the immediate legal battle, you need to understand what has happened every time a state or city has attempted a broad handgun ban in American legal history. Washington, D.C. banned handguns entirely in 1976. That ban stood for 32 years before the Supreme Court struck it down in Heller in 2008. For 3 decades, residents of the nation's capital could not legally own a handgun for self-defense in their own homes. The law was challenged repeatedly and survived for years before the Supreme Court finally drew a clear constitutional line. Chicago followed a similar path, a comprehensive handgun ban that lasted until McDonald vs. City of Chicago in 2010. When the Supreme Court extended Heller's protections to state and local governments. The lesson of that history is that broad firearms restrictions can survive for years, sometimes decades, before being overturned. And during those years, the practical effect falls entirely on law-abiding citizens who follow the law. The criminals these laws are designed to stop don't comply. They never do. The Glock switches that Maryland is trying to address through this ban are already illegal. The people using them aren't buying their Glocks from licensed dealers. The gun owner who walks into a Maryland gun store on January 2, 2027 and asks for a Glock 19 for home defense is the person this law actually stops, not the criminal who already has the device and already doesn't care what Maryland law says about it. That is the argument gun rights advocates are making in court, in the press, and in the court of public opinion. Whether it prevails legally remains to be seen. What comes next? The legal timeline matters here. The law takes effect January 1, 2027, roughly 7 months from now. A federal lawsuit was filed immediately, but federal litigation rarely moves fast enough to block a law before its effective date. An emergency injunction is possible, but courts grant them only when the legal challenge is overwhelmingly likely to succeed. If no injunction is granted, the law goes into effect on schedule. Maryland gun dealers will be prohibited from selling Glocks and Glock-style pistols starting on New Year's Day 2027. Current owners are not required to surrender their firearms. The ban applies only to new sales and transfers. But the market for new Glocks in Maryland will be gone, and owners who want to sell or transfer their existing Glocks will face significant legal complications. The NRA has stated publicly that it will exhaust every legal option available to get the law struck down. Given the Heller precedent and the scope of Glock ownership in the United States, the constitutional argument is genuinely strong. But strong arguments lose in court. They have before. Watch this case. The outcome will determine whether the Glock ban strategy spreads or gets stopped at Maryland's border. If this one hit home, drop a comment below telling me what state you're in and whether you think these bans are coming for your state next. I want to know where you're watching this from, and if you want to stay ahead of the stories reshaping American gun rights, American gun brands, and the Second Amendment battles that are happening right now, subscribe and ring the bell. This story is moving fast, and I'll have updates as the legal battle develops. See you in the next one.